Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're very excited you're here today. We want to welcome you to the Engineerica Education Keynote Series. This session is presented by Engineerica Systems, the developer of Academia and AccuCampus for Center Management Solutions. And this is our third monthly webinar. And we have 2 more scheduled for this year. And they're going to be near the beginning of November and December. For more information, we're going to send those out in the coming weeks, so keep your eye on your emails. And on the screen, you may have recognized a few of our product names, noted a few of our programs and projects that are going on. So we have our Learning Center Innovation Grant, and also you might be curious about our weekly Academia client community meetings, and we would love to tell you more about those and help you with your center management needs. So we invite you to visit engineerica.com for more information, or reach out to us directly at info@engineerica.com. These sessions are not possible without Learning Center professionals and educators such as you. It is a great work that you do, and we appreciate you so much. And we also appreciate the feedback you provide us regarding these sessions. So when you leave this webinar today, there's going to be a pop-up with a 2-minute feedback survey. We ask that you take that and help us out. That really helps us with planning the topics that are most interesting and helpful to you. And we really are so glad that you've joined us for this webinar entitled Peer Tutor Trainings that Inspire, Educate, and Challenge. There will be some interactive portions of the webinar where you'll be asked to submit some answers to questions. So please use the questions or Q&A box. We're going to invite you to submit questions as well as we go along, if you have any, for the presenter, and we'll do our best to answer them along the way. And then we're going to hold a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation. If your audio should go out or you're experiencing other technical issues, we recommend that you refresh the page, or if all else fails, please leave the session and then rejoin using that link sent to your email. Now, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Daniel Sanford, Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning at Boise State University. He's the author of the Rowman and Littlefield Guide for Peer Tutors and the co-author of the Rowman and Littlefield Guide to Learning Center Administration, Leading Peer Tutoring Programs in Higher Education. He has also written several journal articles and presented at several conferences on academic success and academic support and linguistics topics. We want to invite you to visit danielrsanford.com to see more of his wonderful accomplishments. Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and get ready to turn this over to you. Give me one moment. And we'll make you the presenter. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janelle, and thank you, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to talk with you about my favorite topic. There's nothing I love more than engaging in tutor training and talking about tutor training. So hello to all of you. Hello to all of you on the East Coast, where I just was 2 months ago. I just moved to Boise pretty recently to take on my position here. And hello to all of you all over the country and those of you joining internationally. Again, my name is Dan Sanford. I'm at Boise State University currently in a position that's pretty focused on faculty development, although I do work somewhat with peer educators still here. I've been a Learning Center director twice. Once was at Bates College in Lewiston, Maine, where I ran the Academic Resource Commons. And before that, I was at the University of New Mexico, where I was the director of the Center for Academic Program Support most recently. You can pull out your Zoom bingo cards because I'm going to start doing all the things that Zoom presenters do. I'm going to now try showing my screen, and you can tell me if that's working for you. I hope you're looking at the first slide of my PowerPoint. I always tell my tutors, and I'm sure that you do this too, that tutoring is the best possible experience for teaching. There's there's just no better preparation for getting in front of a classroom than spending that time working one-to-one or in small groups with students. When you start teaching for the first time, it's so easy to speak to those 4 or 5 nodding heads in the front row and feel like I'm doing it, I'm making a connection, and not think about the rest of the class that's not making eye contact and nodding back. And once you've had experience tutoring, you no longer can do that. You just have this built-in reflexive knowledge of how stuff is landing with the entire class, and thinking automatically about the students in the back row who might not be as engaged with what you're saying. It's been the same for me with faculty development. In my career, as my job has gotten more and more focused over the years on faculty development and running sessions with staff and faculty, I've found that my experience developing tutor trainings has been the best possible preparation for me in developing good faculty development sessions. And if that's part of your work life, I encourage you to view everything I'm saying here as sort of in that frame as well. I mean, if you cross out tutors and put in attendees or faculty or staff on any of these slides, I think this is all relevant to professional development more broadly, because that's really what we're talking about. Is we're talking about professional development in the context of peer tutoring. And that is very much what peer tutor training is. It's the professional development that tutors need to do their jobs well and exceptionally well. Tutor training is it's an area of passion for me for 2 reasons. One is it's just so fun. I love doing it. There's nothing better, as I know all of you relate to, than working with college students. And very reliably, the most brilliant and articulate and well-spoken and empathetic students on any campus are the ones who, when you put out a call for peer tutors, are the ones who say, yes, I want to do that. I want to help my fellow students succeed. So getting that group in a room together and just having a great discussion, there is nothing more fun and enjoyable and engaging than doing that in my professional life. And I hope that's been your experience as well. 2, I take it really personally, and this is just based on my own experience. Like many of you, I started my career in learning assistance as a tutor. So when I was a graduate student, I've been teaching, I was getting my master's degree, I was teaching freshman English, English 101 and English 102. And then when I started my Ph.D. program in linguistics, I started teaching in linguistics, but I wanted to do something that kept me involved with writing. So I joined my campus's writing center as a tutor. And on my campus, the writing center was part of a larger learning center. I love asking that question of people, how did you come into this line of work? Because it's, I think nobody starts out as a 6 or 8-year-old knowing that they want to become a learning assistance professional. It's always an interesting path to how people found it to this field. I loved being a tutor. I found the work incredibly challenging, incredibly gratifying, just an unbelievably good way to get started working with learners in a really deep way. Where I've been teaching, I've been working in a classroom environment, but what I realized as soon as I started talking to people one-on-one was that my brain worked in a really, really different way than the people I was talking to, and that the way people approach concepts and ideas and skills and learn is so different for different people. And just trying to bridge that gap from how my mind works to how your mind works, to me, is really the essence of what tutoring is, and where the tutors who we have the honor of overseeing really need our support, is figuring out how to do that. I loved it. I loved tutoring. Found it so intellectually engaging. I found tutor training unbearable. It was so hard for me sitting in those sessions. Like, I loved my job. I loved showing up at the Learning Center. And then I found, every week we were sitting down for those sessions, it's like it just felt like a full stop. Like, all of the intellectually engaging, interesting work of working with students, stop now, and you're all going to sit in a room and listen to what I have to say about how you should do this job. A lot of, I guess what I experienced, and a lot of the other tutors who I was working with at the time, experienced as being sort of talked down to, told how to approach the work. As a budding linguist, I was learning a lot about how brains work, and I was coming across a lot of ideas and concepts that I knew were outdated, on the literature of how the brain works. Just not engaging. And I think tutor trainings, because they should be modeled and inspired on peer tutor training, they should be some of the best educational venues on campus, right? And that wasn't my experience. I was in all these great classes, but tutor trainings just didn't, they weren't like that. They weren't inspiring. So I've taken that as a personal challenge, and I've, when I progressed into leadership roles in the center and in every role I've had since then, when I walk into any tutor training, I always reflect back on my experience as a tutor. And I think a little bit about what some of the worst sessions I was in were like, and what some of the great sessions I was in were like, and I try to bring those attributes to my tutor trainings. And the books that Janelle mentioned are very much the result, for me, of working through a lot of those ideas with tutors over the years. Another thing I love doing is visiting learning centers on other campuses. So, whenever I'm at a conference or really just visiting a city, something that I really love doing is visiting the learning center, and when I can, talking to the peer educators on that campus. So I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of peer educators, and I've spoken to many peer educators when I ask about their trainings who say it's great, and they tell me about the great experiences they've had sitting in trainings that look a lot like the pedagogies that they're hearing about as tutors. But I've also spoken to a lot of tutors, and I think a few more tutors who have said that their trainings have not been particularly engaging or good, or something that they found authentically useful for their work with learners. And that's to me, I find the question that's most revealing about tutors is when I ask, do the trainings that you do help you in the work that you're doing with learners? And often I find that the answer is no. So in our own centers and in our field as a whole, what better or a more important thing is there to work on than that? So that's what we're here to do, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with all of you. So if I could pose a question to you to get us started, could you think of a time, and you can just reflect on this for a moment, in your job or in your career or a previous job that you felt really involved and invested in the context of work? This could be anything. This could be a job you had a long time ago, a job you're in now, but just a moment where you felt really invested, really engaged, really involved, intellectually, emotionally, on all levels. You felt present. You felt invoked by what you were doing at work. And if you could just take a moment to think about what were some of the attributes of that experience. And this might be a word or a couple of words or a short sentence, but could you pop that in to the reply field? That question will be bounced out to you momentarily.
Yep, so go ahead and use the question box and we will read out some of the answers as we see them. All right, we're starting to get some. Seeing a student gain confidence was one answer. Engaging students, another. Experiential or hands-on training. Passion and empathy. Ooh, team buy-in. When we're working together, it makes everything worthwhile. Oh, these are great.
Excellent.
Flexible to be creative. Enthusiasm and energy. Able to implement new ideas. Field trips. It felt like a conversation with back and forth between parties.
Oh, this is great. I just want to identify a couple of the threads that I'm hearing and some of the responses that people have already put in. What I'm hearing a lot of is people feeling in some way invited in those sessions. Like I'm hearing a lot of people saying, I felt engaged, I felt like my voice was included, I felt intellectually engaged, creatively engaged. That doesn't just happen, right? Like you don't just sit down in a room and feel invited into a conversation. It's like, it's like walking into a happy hour. Like you don't necessarily feel a part of the group until someone says, hey, come on over and join us. You have to be invited in for that moment to happen, at least until you feel much more comfortable and grounded in a group. So all of these attributes that you're describing in terms of what some of these experiences felt like when you felt involved and invested, obviously that's what we want from our tutors, right? We want them to feel engaged in the center as an organization, as an institution, invested in its mission. And we want them to feel intellectually engaged, bringing all the strengths that they have as students on all levels to the work that they do in the center with learners. That's the goal. So that feeling you're describing, you're articulating, of feeling engaged and interested, I think that's what we're here to do. And when we create tutor trainings, I think this is our single most important venue for fostering that. There's all kinds of ways we create good jobs for our tutors on so many different levels, but tutor trainings, number one. This is our number one place to bring tutors in, make them feel intellectually engaged, enthusiastic, involved, invested. And as we all know from our own jobs, that's when we do good work. And that's what the center's here to do, right? We're creating this space for tutors to do exceptional work with students. How do we make better tutor trainings? Well, let's hold for just one more question. Could I ask you, what's tutor training for? To you, what's the purpose of it? Ask you to bounce in your responses on that response form one more time.
Yeah, so we're getting some. One is using feedback to identify best practices and replicate them. Certification, refreshing knowledge, differentiating teaching from tutoring, establishing expectations for the process and pedagogy of tutoring, and creating a foundation of comfortability to deliver quality support our students can rely on, developing community, let's see, equipping students to start off well in sessions with students and encouraging them to grow into the role, making tutors aware of actions that may be proper and improper, effective and ineffective.
This is great. I'm hearing so many great, thoughtful responses. I love that the certification aspect was called out. I do think that's really important. Yeah, I mean, for tutors to have something from their experience to that they can easily point to and say, this is what my professional development looked like as a tutor. And then there are just so many things being listed here that are I completely agree. Really, really important things for tutors to get. How do we get these things across to tutors, to the peer educators we work with? We're so fortunate in our field. We really have it easy in that the foundational pedagogy that drives what learning centers do translates so well over to tutor training. So I mean, if I was going to distill everything I'm talking about here today just to one sentence, and one thing I'd ask you to take away from this is just before you deliver any training, run it through that filter of make sure that you're following good peer tutoring pedagogy. In learning centers, we're really focused on decentering expertise, right? So when a student comes into our centers, our writing centers, our learning centers, our tutoring programs, our TRIO programs, our SI programs, all the stuff that we do in this field, we don't want them to feel in those interactions like, I'm the learner, I'm the recipient of knowledge, I'm passive in this session, and the tutor, they're the expert. They're the one I'm here to learn from. We're always trying to decenter that. And that's why we give our tutors all these tools like redirecting questions and trying to get students more engaged in the session and active learning. That's what that's for. Like, we want to put learners who come into the center in a space where they're thinking, I'm the expert. Like, my knowledge, my learning process is being centered in this. And we're all in this space where we're all developing towards mastery together, and I have something to contribute to my own agency, my own process for learning. Tutor trainings are the same thing, right? So we're trying to decenter expertise. So it should never be the dynamic of a tutor training of, I'm the trainer, I'm the expert, I'm telling you, the learners, what to do, right? Because we want tutors who are in that space of trainings to be thinking about, what's my expertise? What's the agency I have in this work? What can I bring? What's my journey towards mastery in this work? And what do I have to contribute to this training? Like, we want tutors sitting in tutor trainings to feel like they have agency, they have mastery, they have expertise, they have something to bring to that session. In tutoring, we try to fight the learner-expert dynamic. How do we do the same thing in tutor trainings? So I heard a lot of great responses about tutor trainings. I want to just add one thing to that list of what I think tutor trainings are for. I think tutor trainings are a really, really important place to build in peer educators that sense of investment, that sense of authority, that sense of agency, that they're not just implementing a pedagogy. They're not students in a student employment position who are, just like students who are running a cash register somewhere or checking people in somewhere who are just being told to do something and they're delivering that. They are educators and they have agency in that. And what we're here to do in tutor trainings is trying to give people tools that they can apply in those interactions, but they're real, important, authentic choices that they will have to make in their work with learners. They're high-level educators developing an advanced pedagogy, and what we're there to do is just to give them some helpful tools in their work that they do on their own away from us, delivering that pedagogy. Tutor trainings create that dynamic. You're the expert. You're the one who does the work that this center does in working with learners, and I, as a tutor trainer, am here to support you and help you and empower you in doing that work. But you're the expert. And I think tutor trainings are such an important place to create that. I think that's something we all value in our jobs, and I heard a lot of that when all of you were articulating times that you felt engaged. Those moments when we feel invited, empowered, and are able to take some agency, those are the moments when we feel invested and do our best work. And that's what, of course, what we want for our tutors as well. That's something that is absolutely necessary in working with peer educators, as I know you all know, is treating them like the high-level educators that they are. A lot of what I'll be talking about is drawn from these two books. I'm going to be filling in around the edges quite a bit. If you have read these books, great. I'm going to elaborate somewhat on what's here. If you haven't read these books, I just want to give you the general guidance that the Guide for Peer Tutors broadly is a book that's a lot more about the content of tutors, tutor training. So if you're looking for more information on what content to deliver to tutors and readings you might want to put in front of tutors, that's where to go. Guide to Learning Center Administration is much more about, a little bit more what we're talking about here today, which is attributes of good tutor trainings and building a tutor training program. I don't want to dwell here because I know I'm preaching to the choir. You all signed up for this webinar. None of you feels like tutor training doesn't work. It doesn't matter. But perhaps like me, you've been called on by administrators sometime to articulate the case for tutor training. It's an expensive investment, either in staff time and perhaps you're paying students for your trainings. The preparation that you put into this is a lot. It's an investment. I just want to validate that investment is worth it. This is something that's very, very well attested in the literature of our field. Tutor training works. Tutor training is a critical component of the effectiveness of tutoring programs. There have been some great studies. There's a few identified here that have looked at this. It has a real and measurable effect on the strategies that tutors use. And in the absence of training, and this, to me, this one is just so important. Students' preconceptions about tutoring drive what they do. When tutors are trained, the things that they get in training drive what they do. So, when you think about people's preconceptions about tutoring, I think the most common one is that, being a tutor means that I'm a smart student and I'm explaining stuff to another student who's not as smart as me. And overcoming that is just so important. Untrained tutors, relative to their trained counterparts. Jeff Bailey uncovered this in one of my favorite studies. Untrained tutors tend to use less effective tutoring strategies. They tend to use less relational communication. They tend to make fewer efforts to assess learners' comprehension. They rely more heavily on explanations. They fail to direct learners toward higher level thinking. They tend to make more limited use of active learning and academic skills, and they tend to employ a smaller set of helping strategies. Tutor training matters, and what we do in learning centers matter, because learning centers are the places where this stuff happens, where these student behaviors that peer educators are developed in are cultivated. So here's really the goal, right? In tutor training, we're trying to take these students who are coming in with tutor-oriented factors, right? They're going to approach, left to their own devices, as I would, or you would, or any of us would. They're going to approach tutoring sessions based on their preconceptions, and they're going to approach those sessions based on what's comfortable to them. So they're going to do the things that in the moment, in that interaction, feel comfortable, feel easy to implement, feel intuitive, which means it lines up with how they're thinking about tutoring coming in, and based on all of those preconceptions. So for example, right, if I'm a student who's coming in as a new tutor and I haven't been trained, or maybe I've even been tutoring for a long time, but I haven't been trained, the most natural thing to me, if a student asks me a question, is to answer it, right? That's based on social conventions, based on like every educational format I've been a part of, and every conversation I've been a part of as a human being. The most natural thing to me is going to be, if somebody asks me a question, and I think that my role in this is to be the expert and explain it to other people, I'm going to open my mouth and I'm explaining it back to them. If I'm in a tutoring session and I'm driving it based off of tutor-oriented factors, you know, if a student is working on a problem or a paper and they push it across the table to me and they think, what do you think? I'll probably take it and I'll sit back and I'll look at it. That's what the student expects me to do. That's what feels comfortable for me to do. So that's what I'll do, is I'll sort of check out from the social interaction with the student and I'll look at it. Those are the behaviors, of course, that we don't want tutors to engage in, right? We want them to engage in sessions where if somebody poses a question to you as a tutor, you're going to try to reflect that question back. You're going to try to invoke and make relevant to the session and the learning interaction everything that the student is bringing in. You want tutors asking questions like, oh, wow, that's a great question. You know, tell me what you know about vectors so far. Or, yeah, can you pull out your class notes from yesterday and can you try to find this topic in them? Or do you know about the index of your textbook? Let's take a look at that and let's try to find this topic and tell me what you're seeing, right? You want tutors pushing things back on learners so that the onus for learning is on them. We want learner-oriented sessions that aren't focused on what tutors think is natural or intuitive, but are grounded in what learners need. We want sessions that are grounded in pedagogy, empirical findings about what works in teaching and learning and in peer tutoring specifically. We want tutoring sessions that are effective for students, for learners, where they're getting out of them what they want to get out of them. And we want sessions that are challenging, you know, that aren't necessarily comfortable for learners either. We want sessions where, you know, learners are being engaged in ways that push them beyond their comfort zone into new territories so that they're growing in these sessions. Tutor training is where this happens. Okay, the difference between tutor-oriented sessions that are grounded in what's comfortable to tutors and learner-oriented sessions that are grounded in what learners need is tutor training, and that's what has to happen in tutor trainings. How do we get there? Okay, I'm going to start with the most obvious one, and I think generally these are organized of most obvious to least obvious, most intuitive to least intuitive. Obviously, the content of tutor trainings matters. We listed some of these earlier. There are some really important things you identified that are things tutors need. It's really important for tutors to understand the context of their work in terms of the history of learning centers, what the peer tutoring model is. It's really important for tutors to understand what active learning is, what collaborative learning is, to appreciate the affective domain of learning, what it means to make students comfortable in a learning space. Some concrete learning strategies they can coach students on, you know, great note-taking skills and how to study, these sorts of things. Engaging students across diversity, being aware of students as unique learners, fostering critical thinking. This is all stuff tutors should know, really, really important. I'm not going to focus here on the content of tutor trainings or of when you're building out a tutor training program. what some of those ingredients would be. You have lots of other great places for that. You could check out my book, you could check out CRLA guidelines, or any of the other great places you could find that information. And happy to talk about that in Q&A at the end of the session too. I think this topic is really important, the content of tutor trainings. I wrote a whole book about it because I think it's so important. But I also think it is the least important of the things that we are going to talk about today. I don't think there is any one piece of knowledge that every tutor absolutely needs and is totally prerequisite to sending tutors into working with students. I think much more important than the content of tutor trainings is the atmosphere that's invoked in them and the attitudes that are invoked among peer educators. Trainings are learning communities. Okay? They're places where, just like in any learning community, learners at different levels of educational attainment are working together towards shared goals. One of the really important things that happens in tutor trainings is that less experienced tutors have the benefit of mentorship and just gathering information and observing skills that more advanced peer educators are using, so that they can think about the relevance of that to their own work. When you're putting topics in front of tutors, a lot of what we're doing is just providing a space for that transfer to happen. Like, if you put a concept or an idea or skill in front of people, you're creating a conduit where that transfer from more experienced to less experienced peer educators can take place. We're creating learning communities. Training should empower tutors to make effective, informed choices in their work with learners. In any given moment, tutors have choices to make, right? If you take any cross-section in time of a tutoring interaction, tutor has a choice to make of, in this moment, what's the best way for me to engage with this learner to get them closer to their educational goals. Tutor training should meet tutors there. It should give them the tools for, okay, you're in that moment, you have some questions on how to advance. I'm trying to give you some principles and skills that are going to be relevant to that question. I think the order in which things are presented really matters to tutors. And I just want to mention as an aside, I think probably the most common mistake people make in building tutoring programs is tutor training programs is front loading too much. To deliver a very large, beginning of the year or beginning of semester training where tutors get a huge amount of information and pedagogy that they're then expected to deliver throughout the year. Humans don't really learn that way. Like we can't really learn anything until we sort of have a cognitive hook to hang it on, which is why most classes are structured the way they are, where you get a little bit, you practice that knowledge, you come back for more, you get a new bit of knowledge, you practice that knowledge, you engage with it, you come back, you get a little bit more. I think it's really important to give tutors some spaces to work with learners first, so that they realize what some of their gaps in knowledge are, and then your trainings can help to meet that student in that space. So how do we get some of these things across, the things that we're trying to get tutors to think about, to use in their trainings with students? So if a student came in for tutoring, they entered your center and they sat down with a tutor, and you saw a peer tutor working with that student by just explaining content to them. So you're observing a session and you're just seeing your tutor explaining things to the student who's not really talking much, if at all. I think we all agree that that's not ideal. Like, that's not what we hope to see from peer tutoring interactions, which are based on a model that places learners in a much more active role. Peer tutoring is all about constructivism. It's based on the idea that learning doesn't take place by one person who's the expert is communicating ideas, and then they get channeled to the person who doesn't know, and then that person learns in that way, of like a file being copied over in a computer. Peer tutoring is based on constructivism, the idea that all learning happens within a person's head, right? It's like building a ship in a bottle. You have to build it up yourself. You have to construct that knowledge for yourself. And as educators, we're trying to support people in that process of building up meaningful knowledge structures. So tutor training is where that starts. And if they're going to do that, they have to see it happen in tutor training. So tutor training is where that starts. Whatever you want to see tutors do in sessions, we need to model in trainings. And that's the right way to do it anyway. If we want to follow principles of active and collaborative learning, is apply peer tutoring pedagogy. If we believe in it, we should be using it, right? So one powerful thing, less is more. Okay? We're always telling our tutors, like, it generally makes sense when you're planning what you want to do with students, instead of trying to do a ton, try to drill down on the most essential things and pick 1 or 2 or 3 things that are really, really important data across and spend your time there, because it's always a better choice to do less and make it really active and collaborative than to do more and just be, driving information at people in the same way that they're already getting in lectures. And in peer tutoring pedagogy, we believe that the one who's doing the work is the one who learns. So if a tutor is explaining a bunch of concepts to a student, that's not ideal because they're doing all the work of active learning. So the tutor will get a lot out of that session, but the learner likely won't because they're not being asked to do anything. The one who does is the one who learns. So in tutoring sessions, we want to make sure learners are the ones who are doing a lot of work. Tutor training, same way. We want to do less content, and we want to make sure the tutors are doing a lot of work and engagement with that content. We want to present ideas, and then we want to trust tutors to find the implications of those principles for themselves. That is so hard to do, but it's really important. And the reason it's so important is because this is where that creation of agency happens. So if we deliver ideas and we say, and this is how to implement the tutor training, we undercut our own message, and we also take away agency from tutors. If we give people interesting ideas to engage with and then have them draw out the implications and identify the relevance to their own work, we're creating a constructivist learning space for them where they can take those ideas and apply it to their own mental models for what great tutoring looks like. So I'll give you an example of this. I am a cognitive linguist. So what really excites me is how information is stored and processed in the mind. So if you ask me, what do tutors need to know? I'm going to say, oh, well, they need to understand the cognition of learning. They need to understand, nuts and bolts of how metacognition works. So as a result, here are 3 of my favorite tools to put in front of tutors. I love these 3 because, one, I think they're exciting. They're emergent findings in the literature of cognition. So it feels like putting relatively new research in front of students, which I think is always nice when you're working with people. And I like these principles because I think they have a lot of repercussions for peer tutoring. And I like them because a lot of peer tutors haven't come across these ideas before. So distributed practice is a really solid finding from the literature of cognition. Distributed practice, in a nutshell, is the idea that if you have a set amount of time to study something, to try to learn an idea, that time will be more impactful if it's spread out than if it's all at once. So, if we spend 5 minutes a day for a week trying to learn a concept, that will be much more effective than spending the same amount of time all in one chunk once a week. Repeated recall is the idea that knowledge and skills are organized in mental schemas, and every time a schema gets activated, it becomes stronger and easier to recall the next time. So if you keep basically forgetting and then remembering a piece of information, it becomes easier to access. Every time you do that, it gets easier to access the next time. It's why flashcards work. That's a really powerful finding from the literature. Interleaving is a really fun one. Interleaving is the idea that we're used to studying by saying, okay, I'm sitting down to study biology, and I'm going to focus on biology, and I want to get mitosis. So this is my study session where I'm trying to get down mitosis. But that turns out not to be the best way to study. Interleaving is the idea that it's really powerful for students to actually switch between different ideas and even different classes a lot, instead of just focusing on one thing, because it seems to really help people find context for knowledge. So if someone is, switching between studying chemistry and learning about atomic structure, and then switching over to their sociology class and thinking about social context, and then going to biology and then studying mitosis, they're going to draw connections between different areas of study in a way that's really helpful for college students to do, and also understand the context of what they're learning a little bit more. So people can powerfully interleave even within one class. All right, so that's stuff that I think is great stuff for tutors, and also stuff that I know a lot about because of my background. So if I'm going to design a tutor training on that, my natural impulse is, okay, gang, here's cognitive schemas, here's cognitive load theory. I'm going to tell you about distributed practice. And then I made this training, so I'm coming in with ideas about what it should look like when tutors do it. So I'm going to say, all right, here's some literature, and then here's how to do this with students. Here's repeated recall. You know, here's what the literature says. Here's how to do this with students. And here's interleaving, and here's what the literature says, and here's how to do this with students. This is a terrible tutor training, right? Very fun for me to talk about. I love opening my pie hole and talking about stuff I know a lot about. Terrible training to sit through. It's all lecture. It doesn't model active learning, and it doesn't give tutors any opportunity, one, to engage in an active and collaborative way with this stuff so that they're building up their own mental models for it. It puts them in a frame of mind where, okay, that's the expert, I'm the learner, I'm someone who's here to learn about this stuff. It doesn't invite in their expertise, and it doesn't give them any agency. So, what could we do with this instead? Well, here'd be one approach. It would be a great idea to take just one of those concepts instead of all three and say, okay, well, here's distributed practice in a nutshell. And maybe this is a piece that, as the trainer, I would deliver myself very, very briefly, like 5 minutes or less. Here's what distributed practice is. Even better, just a very, very short, like a paragraph or less reading on distributed practice that we could put in front of tutors to have them just look at and familiarize themselves with the concept before they jump in, and then explore that in groups. Let's make it collaborative. Let's make it active. So, asking them, instead of me telling them, what are the implications of this idea for the guidance that you would give learners, and give tutors a space to come up with that, find the implications for themselves. And then perhaps in a large group discussion, what are the implications of this idea for the way that you structure tutoring sessions? So how would you use this? What are the implications? And this is a much better training. I would note this is a much less time-intensive training to create, right? So this training is going to take me, it's planning a lecture. That takes a lot of time. This training, boy, I could throw this together really quickly, and it's much better for tutors, right? They're going to get a lot more out of this session. So that's a powerful thing I'd remind you of. Making things more active and collaborative generally means less preparation for you as the presenter, in addition to being better pedagogically, and we'll have better outcomes. We could go a different way. We could have tutors separate out into 3 groups, and we could give each group a different reading. So one group's focusing on interleaving, one's focusing on repeated recall, one's focusing on, repeat interleaving, it should say. Distributed practice. And then we could ask tutors in those groups, what are the implications of this for the way that you study? What are the implications for the guidance that you give learners? And then let's do a jigsaw. So we're pulling out our collaborative learning techniques, and let's put students in new groups where we mix up people from those first groups, and you say, okay, you're the expert now in your new group. You're the expert on the strategy you just learned about. Explain it to the others in your group. You're building up tutors' sense of investment and agency in these ideas. And then as a group, think about, okay, what are the implications of this stuff for the work that you do with learners, for the way that you approach sessions? Again, really basic stuff we're talking about, but everything is, we're trying to make it more active, we're trying to make it more collaborative, and we're trying to foster in tutors at every opportunity a sense of, I'm being trusted to work out the implications of this for myself. I'm being treated as a smart person who has something to bring to this work. The only cost of this is how hard it is personally. It is hard for me, probably hard for you too, is just to not go there yourself. The only way you can create space here for tutors to step into finding the implications of ideas for themselves is for you not to give the implications of those ideas yourself. You have to make that space. Less is more, make it active, make it collaborative, powerful ways. Here's another way we could structure the same session. In groups, we could design a mock tutoring session that takes advantage of the effects of interleaving and then break that into a large discussion. Collaborative learning techniques, such a great way to structure tutor trainings. Okay, second principle. Allow tutors space to practice the skills that they'll use. I mentioned that I think content is the least important part of tutor trainings. This is the reason why. If tutors are having sessions where they learn about principles, but they aren't practicing them, they're not getting the chance to use those skills, then really the time and investment in training is not going anywhere. There simply will not be positive outcomes from that. Because tutoring is in the academy, but it is not academic. It's a skill. It's something you do. It's a trainable skill. It can be learned, but it's operational. It's something you do. It's not something you just learn about. If we hold trainings where we engage tutors over ideas, but we don't give them the chance to actually try them, to practice them, to build up their fluency in these skills, it would be like coaching a basketball team, where there's a game coming up in a month, and how you prepare for that is you hold trainings where you talk about the rules of basketball and you lecture them on the strategy of basketball, and maybe you learn some calculus where you calculate like the how much force to apply to a ball to give it the arc to go in the basket, and you coach them on those strategies, and then they go into the game, and that team will not win that basketball game, right? Because it's all about practice, right? People need to not just learn about what they're doing, they have to do it. So they build up fluency and skill to be able to do those things. So when you look at a really good tutor training session, it should look a lot like walking into a really great learning center. You should see a lot of people doing things, practicing things, engaging in tutoring, and really practicing the skills that they're going to be using. Redirecting questions. This is a bread and butter piece of our pedagogy. I think all of us train our students on this too. When you get a question, not just answer it, but try to reflect that question back to the learner in the way that they can answer it or partially answer it and validate their own expertise. It's really good pedagogy to put the onus on learners. Have you tried it? It's hard. It's so hard redirecting questions. If you know you're supposed to do it, but you haven't practiced doing it, it feels awkward, largely because you're countering what the expectation is of the student. When a student comes into a tutoring session and asks a question, it's much easier socially to answer it because that's what the student expects. It's also just hard on a nuts and bolts level. It's really hard in the moment to come up with the right question, to not just sort of clumsily say, well, what do you think the answer is, but to find the right kind of question that will lead students toward kind of a partial answer that may help them get toward the complete answer on their own. It is very much a skill. It is very much something that needs to be practiced. So telling students that redirecting questions is a goal in tutor training sessions is a good starting point, but it can't stop there. Stopping there won't get tutors any closer to actually being able to deliver that pedagogy. Tutors have to be able to actually practice it, right? So to have some really easy ways to redirect questions they can go to, and then sit down in mock tutoring sessions with other students, other tutors, where they actually practice doing that. Practice actually saying the words. Can you pull out your notebook and look at your lecture notes from today, and let's see if we can find the answer together. Practice saying the words. Well, what do you know about solving equations? Like, what are some of the basic tools that we can apply to this? That's what will actually allow that skill, that idea to transfer into tutoring sessions. Finding the place in a tutoring session where students' confusion starts, right? It's very, very easy to say in tutor trainings, ask diagnostic questions, use diagnostic questions to figure out where students' confusion about a topic is. Very hard to do. Coming up with the right diagnostic question. Like, it's not an easy pedagogy. It's a really high level, challenging pedagogy, and tutors need practice doing it, identifying the place where students are in their journey towards mastery so that they can develop interventions to go there. Coming up with meaningful diagnostic questions is a skill tutors must practice if they're going to do in sessions. Identifying students' zone of proximal development, scaffolding them as they solve students at the limits of their ability. All this stuff that we all want to see our tutors do, they have to be able to practice in sessions, or it simply will not happen in sessions. All those things feel to tutors who haven't had the chance to practice these things clumsy and awkward and hard, because they are. And giving students the chance to practice those things in a safe environment so that they can then transfer those new skills out into the real learning environment of the center is the goal. And it has to be active and engaging to make that happen. Working with students to negotiate a plan for a session, placing students in small groups to compare notes, putting a paper back in front of a learner so that they're the one doing the work, wrapping up a session effectively, all stuff we tell tutors to do, all really hard stuff to do. Again, stuff that they have to practice. I'm going to give what I think is my best example of this, something that I really, really hope to see my tutors doing. And I know is hard to do because I remember from being a tutor how hard it was, and something that at some point I realized, like, wow, I've been telling my tutors to do this for years, and I don't think I've ever actually seen it happen in a tutoring session. So I've started devoting significant time to giving students a space to practice this. Redirecting a session toward learning strategies. So you all know this, right? There are many, many moments where a learner comes into the center because they're failing biology, or their teacher referred them in for math help, or they have a paper coming up and they're not as ready as they need to be for getting it in on the deadline. But those issues aren't really the issues. And what we want tutors to do is figure out, okay, the actual issue here is that the student is not taking notes effectively, or they're not using the time that they have to study in a way that's going to help them, or they're not managing their time effectively to have enough time to study. So we all want tutors to do this, to realize those moments where, oh, okay, like math tutoring per se is not what the student needs. Right now, what the student needs is time management, and I'm going to redirect the session to time management. Really, really hard to do. Again, it feels clumsy, it feels awkward, and it's a really high level skill, in large part, again, for social reasons, because students are coming into the center very goal driven. They want something, they want an A in their math class, they want to do well in the next assignment, they want to meet their deadline. So will not necessarily be super receptive to seeing the session redirected towards something that they don't perceive as their primary need, like time management or note taking or whatever it is. And I have found that devoting a whole training or several trainings to actually giving tutors some spaces to think about how do I redirect session in this way to be a really productive use of time, right? So here's basically the training I was giving 10 years ago. Here's learning strategies, note taking, time management, how to study, reading. Here are best practices, right? So here's how to do that. Here's what it looks like to, is what the research says about how to study well. This is what happens with tutors, and then maybe some small group discussion. So for each of these items, what are some of the signs you might see that a learner's having issues in this area? How might you intervene to steer the session? It's fine. It's not a bad training, but again, I wasn't seeing a lot of actual effect. How about this as a rework of that training? So here's learning strategies. Here are the topics we're going to cover. Very, very quick. Again, 5 minutes, 10 minutes tops. Large group discussion. What are some of the signs you see in the work that you do with learners that a student may be having issues with learning strategies, and some of the ways you might transition this session towards addressing those strategies. Giving students an activity where they're going to actively work in pairs, addressing a scenario, really acting out the thing that they're trying to do in sessions. That's the meat of the session, actually trying these skills, practicing them. building up comfort, overcoming discomfort, building fluency, and then coming back to a large group discussion. How'd that go? What was hard? Let's reflect on this and let's figure out how it was important and can you do this? And that gets us into another thing that I think is incredibly important to do in tutor trainings, which is to incorporate opportunities for reflection. Reflection is powerful stuff. Reflection allows learners to grow from experience by giving them a space to think about what their experience has taught them. And for tutors, it allows tutors to grow as educators, progress further in their journey towards mastery in implementing peer-led learning by giving them the space to think about, where am I in my journey? What are my gaps? What am I finding hard? And what's the relevance of what I just learned here in this room to what I'm going to go do, in my next session after this, or next week, or the rest of my time as a tutor in the work that I do with learners to think about their own growth. Reflection guides and scaffolds tutors in taking the new skill that they just got from you, the new principle or idea that they just got from you, and thinking about, how do I use this? How do I integrate it in my practice? Like, I've got a style, I'm a developing educator. How do I tie this in? How do I bring this into my toolkit? What intentions do I have for this? How does it bear on what I do? Reflection fosters professional development in one really important way by helping people grow and develop, but two, also being able to articulate that. There's a common experience I've had that I bet you've had too, where a tutor who's about to graduate and is applying for jobs wants to share their resume or cover letter with you, and what you see listed there is tutor. Tutors do a lot. They deliver a lot of pedagogy, and there's so much people can say on a resume or cover letter or interviews about what the repercussions of their experience as tutors mean, for the professional arena, for academia, for becoming a teacher, any of those things. But it takes reflection to be able to articulate that. So reflection really helps there as well. Reflection plays this really nuts and bolts role in learning. Students enter a space not ready to learn. Opening a session with reflection can just help get students into that space emotionally. And also starting a session with reflection can mean you're activating a schema, you're activating a learning space. So you're having students activate everything that they know about a topic so that then what you have to provide can be tied into that. So it primes students to incorporate information. Reflection can take place in writing. It can take place in dialogue. It's huge. It's where theory becomes practice. So let's say we're running a session on the transition to college and the unique needs of first-year learners. We could present some literature, we could talk about those challenges, we could give some statistics from our own campuses, and then we could put some best practices in front of students. Or let's build this around reflection instead. And why wouldn't we? What do I know about being a first-year student? It's been a long time since I was a first-year college student. But for the tutors in the room, they are experts, much more than me, on what's challenging about being in the first year of college. I mean, knowing this literature well means nothing compared to actually having been through this experience the year before or a couple of years before. So let's start with a reflection. And give students some space to write to them, just to get back into that mental space of, what do I know about this? How is my experience relevant? Bringing in their expertise as people who are recently in this situation. Maybe a quick lightning lecture then, maybe 5 minutes, again, 10 minutes tops on, okay, what are some of the research findings on this? What are some local statistics? But then let's get back into reflection. Let's do it dialogically this way. And in a group, okay, let's process this together. Now we'll do it collaboratively, but what were some of your experience as a first-year student? Did you feel disconnected? When did you start feeling connected? And if you could just think about stuff you've learned since then as a successful student who became a tutor, that would be relevant to you in some of those hard moments as a first-year student. What would you share? And then let's talk about that in a group. Reflection is a great way to close a session. Also, the reason we tell tutors to really focus on closing sessions effectively is that it provides a space for learners to internalize what happened and say, okay, how am I going to take this into the work I'm doing from here? How am I going to carry this plan forward? Tutor training, same thing. Reflection gives tutors this moment to think, okay, what did I learn? How am I going to integrate this? Model the pedagogies that tutors will use. We've been doing this all along with the examples we've looked at so far. We put a lot of big theoretical ideas in front of tutors, everything we just talked about. You want to give tutors, you want tutors to give learners opportunities to practice the skills they're learning in a low stakes environment. You want to give learners opportunities for reflection. You want them to do all these things. You can tell them to. You can show them literature. You can show them graphs. You can lecture at them. But if you want to walk through your center and see tutors implementing active and collaborative learning, if you want to walk through your center and see tutors doing these things, you have to do it. They have to see it from you. If you want to walk through your center and see your tutors using the whiteboards that you've installed around the space, you've got to use them so that they can see what it looks like to see it used. If you just install the $5,000 interactive whiteboard and you want your tutors to use it, you've got to use that thing, and you've got to use that thing in sessions, because you have to make the case to them this is a valuable tool. And the most powerful way you can do that with any of these tools that we want our tutors to use is to model them. So whatever you want to see your tutors doing in your center, you must do in your trainings. If you want them to be vulnerable with the learners they're working with about what's hard, what was hard about their own journey as students, you've got to be vulnerable with your tutors. If you want to see people excited about tutoring, you've got to be excited about tutoring. And nothing undermines tutor trainings more than not using the pedagogies that we're telling our tutors to use, because tutors are smart. They're smart students. And if we're standing in front of them saying use active learning, use collaborative learning techniques, but not doing that ourselves, these very smart students will see right through us and see that we don't believe the things that we're saying. The most powerful way we can articulate the value of these pedagogies is to use them. Okay, and then for us, it lets us use the benefits of active and collaborative learning. So here's a tutor training I could do. I could say, here's some challenging scenarios. Here's some things that come up a lot that I've observed happening in the center. Here's some strategies you can use to try to engage students in those spaces. If you're working with a learner who's a little bit overly dependent on you as a tutor, here's some stuff you can do in that situation. We could work through all this. Let's instead try to build this training around students seeing in action, tutors seeing in action the pedagogies that we hope they use. Let's start with reflection again. Think back over a session. What were some of those challenges? Because why should I tell them what's hard about being a tutor? They're the ones who are doing this work. They know so much better than me what those issues are. Let's organize them in small groups. Those groups could be emergent. So whatever tutors identify as some challenging scenarios, then let's organize some thematic groups where they can work with other students who are working on similar things. Let's give them some prompts for discussing this. When I do that, when I put students in small groups, I'm modeling something that I really want them to do in the center. I really, really want tutors in my centers to, if they see students working on similar problems, to try to put their heads together and think about those together. It's a skill I want them to practice. So I want them to see me doing it. Then let's put them in a large group so you can share and discuss your responses. I'm going to give them an activity where they're actually going to look at what this first group's put up on the whiteboard, and then I want them to walk around and make comments under the guidance that other groups put together. So again, if I want them to use those whiteboards around the space, I'm going to show them what it looks like to assign learners to use that so that they can build out their mental model for what that looks like. And then if I want them getting together with partners, I'm going to close with that activity. So this training is designed around trying to show tutors what some of these pedagogies look like in action. Okay, and I'm ending with what I think is the absolute most important thing to do in tutor trainings. Tutor trainings should be, must be, intellectually engaging. Because think about the space that we're creating, all right? So we hire peer tutors, right? So we're taking all these students who are good students. They're smart, they're engaged in what they're doing. They're students who not only are sharp, but have emerged as leaders, like they have the skills that got them a job as a tutor. They probably got referred by a faculty member, you know, to be there in the center. They went through an interview with you. They're really articulate about what they do, about their experience as a college student. Okay, and then we gave them some experience tutoring, and then we put them in a room together. And we have all of these brilliant students, just some of the best and brightest on campus. What are you going to do to honor that? Because that is a responsibility. Like, you did that, you created that, you brought all these brilliant people together, you got them, they're in a room or a Zoom room, you know, these days. What are you going to do? And to honor that, we have to make those trainings interesting, exciting, intellectually engaging. Just to treat those students as professionals they are, as the intellectuals they are, and also to foster an enthusiasm and intellectual engagement that'll run throughout all of the work that tutors do with learners. They are the experts on tutoring. It's not us. They are the ones who do the work that the Learning Center does. So everything that we're doing is trying to support that, right? And that's really the dynamic is, okay, my job as a trainer here is to put some stuff in front of you that will be helpful to you. Your job in this room is to figure out how this is relevant to what you do and to grow from that. That's the dynamic. So we try to present students with unfamiliar, challenging ideas, things that place them out of their comfort zone, beyond their intellectual comfort zone, challenge them with those ideas, get them talking about it, and force them to re-examine their own beliefs, their own preconceptions about tutoring and about student success. How do we do this? We need them to find the implications of ideas for themselves. We need to treat them like serious intellectuals and serious pedagogues. Show them the research, show them ideas, don't tell them implications, have them work it out. Have them figure out for themselves what to do with the things you're putting in front of them. It's so hard to resist showing students the implications, but it is so incredibly important to do, because none of us are experts on being a college student in 2021. None of us are experts on being a peer tutor in 2021. The students who we're working with are. They have a truer, deeper, more recent, authentic expertise in those things than we do. We have valid expertise, but it's not that. And it's only in the conversation that's created in training that growth can come out of it for tutors. So you give them the idea and you get out of there, because now the work is on them to figure out the implications for their work. Here's cognitive load theory. Here's the principle of interleaving. Here's anti-racism. Okay, that's what I got. You go. What does this mean for the work that you do on this campus? What does this mean for this learning center? I do tutor training, and I also do, as I mentioned, a lot of faculty development, and this is the approach I try to use in faculty development also. It's a really powerful technique across trainings and professional development generally. So here's an example. This is not terribly new pedagogy. This is 100 years old, but here's a critical pedagogy, Paulo Freire's approach to education. And you all know this stuff. Here's what critical pedagogy is. Here's what I could do. I could tell them, I could say, here's what Paulo Freire was. This is the banking model of education. Here's how Paulo Freire challenged that. And here's how you can use that as tutors. That's not great. How about this? How about we put critical pedagogy really briefly in front of students. We tell them what it is. We put those ideas in a nutshell, and we have them do some collaborative learning techniques around that. Think, pair, share, where they reflect and draw out their own experience, where they think about times. I mean, really, where they're trying to confront the idea that even though these ideas are 100 years old, There are lots of things that are going to encounter in higher education that run directly counter to this. The idea that higher education still 100 years later has not internalized these ideas about critical pedagogy. Let's have them in small groups, do a short reading on critical pedagogy, and then think about their initial thoughts and responses. What would Paulo Freire think if he could walk around this campus today and look at, some of the common formats of instruction that he would see? What do you think he'd think if he could follow you around to classes? In groups, let's think about, okay, this idea says that education can be this really insidious thing. It can be a way to just reinforce problematic power structures. What do you think about that? Let's unpack that idea. That's your work. You go over there, do a think, pair, share. I'll be here to support as I'm needed. And in a large group, let's talk about, do we think critical pedagogy is important? And then let's talk a little bit individually or in pairs or small groups about how does this translate to the work that you do? Or how can this learning center be a site for critical pedagogy? So we're just trying to reverse this training by putting the work, the onus, the implications on tutors. Do what works for you in terms of training structure, but give students this idea. I'm going to mention one more really briefly. As much as you can, it's really great to give students the opportunity to work in affinity groups. It could be by discipline. So for example, putting your math tutors together, your writing tutors together to think about peer groups. It could be by tutoring format, like putting your SI leaders together, putting your students who do mostly individual consultations together. There's so many benefits to doing this. It's good to be sort of economical and efficient in our tutor trainings by when we're talking about something that's relevant for all tutors, by doing that with all tutors together to build that big sense of cohort in the center. But it's also really important either within a session or perhaps in your overall training structure, alternating sessions where students can break out in affinity groups so that they can think about what some of the things are that are unique to the work that they do, so that they can build up a sense of, again, expertise and agency, this feeling of what's my professional identity, what's my scholarly identity in the center. I'm this, I am a student who, I work with math students. I work predominantly in online one-to-one interactions. I'm an expert in that pedagogy. I'm invested in it. And this is the group of people that I explore that with. These are my colleagues. Affinity groups in trainings do that, right? So if I want to explore the zone of proximal development with students, I can explain those ideas to them. Or let's really briefly talk about that idea and then break the students out into groups by discipline. Think about a course in an area that you tutor. Make a map of the major concepts that are covered in that course and think about the places that, based on your work as a student and based on your experience when you took that course, what are some of the places that students get stuck? And then as a tutor, what are some of the ways that we can scaffold students in those moments? Join another group, talk about what some of those ideas were and some of those strategies. So breaking students out into those groups can help to give them an opportunity to talk to colleagues and to really think through the implications of ideas, not just for tutoring generally, but for the specific kind and form of tutoring that they do. And let's give tutors some ways to grow over time. A comprehensive tutor training program can't just think about tutors coming in. It has to think about honoring their growth over time. So imagine yourself as a tutor. So you are a tutor in your third year in the center. So let's say you started as a sophomore, you're a senior now. As a student, you've grown so much. I mean, you've gone from someone who was just entering college, just picking a major, to someone who has become a real master learner in the field that you've chosen to study. You spent all that time in the center. You've grown so much. You have 2 years under your belt of working with learners, might be hundreds of interactions. You've gained all this experience. You've become really good at what you do. You're very good in the center. You're really good at zeroing in on what students need, challenging them, having great learning interactions with them. You go into tutor training and you see this. Welcome to the center. Here's the history of learning centers. Here's the peer tutoring model. Here's Title IX. Here's FERPA. That's a depressing moment, right? Because your growth is not being honored. How about this instead? How about any of these ways of engaging for you in that situation where you're an experienced tutor? Create a poster to display in the center. Develop and lead a workshop yourself for other learners in your field. Lead a training for other tutors in your area. Develop an assessment project for the center. Create a series of social media posts for the center. So trying to invite in and honor all of the experience and growth that tutors have had over time so that it can enrich the center overall. I love all of these. You don't have to do any of these. I think the lowest hanging fruit and a really good way, to invite returning tutors into sessions in a way that honors their expertise is just to call them out at the start of the session. To say, at the start of every tutoring session, just recognize, I know there's a lot of people in this room who have been here a semester or two, who have some experience with these things. I want to encourage you in your groups to share your expertise. Just that alone can just invite more experienced tutors into a space where they can share a little bit more freely and not feel like they're just having to sit through the same sessions over and over again. Another great way to use your returning tutors in trainings is to have them serve as leaders of breakout groups, sort of guiding the discussions that are happening among perhaps more reticent, newer tutors. I hope there's something here that's helpful for you. I'll be really happy to take your questions in just a moment here. I want to stress one takeaway, if you will allow me. One, before you do any tutor training session, just think about putting yourself in the shoes of a tutor who has to sit through that session. So I'm a tutor. I'm super smart. I really care about the work that I do. I care about my own growth. I care about the job I'm going to get eventually and how this contributes to that. From the perspective of that student, the tutor training you're putting in front of them, is it engaging? Is it genuine? Does it practice what it preaches? And if I'm a returning tutor, if I'm a vet, if I've been at this for a while, does it honor that space? If you will allow me 2 takeaway points from this presentation, I would add this one in as well. Always consider when you're developing tutor training sessions, the case of, let's say one of your tutors came to you and said, I have to develop a workshop on this topic. What advice would you give them? If you were trying to get them to implement really good peer tutoring pedagogy, all the things you would tell them, like, okay, let's figure out how to make this more active, more collaborative, more ways to put the onus on learners, more ways to deflect your own expertise. Take that advice and internalize it for yourself and try to develop trainings that show and that honor all of those pedagogies. Thank you so much for your time. That's what I have. What questions do you have for me, or what responses do you have for what are some of the ways that you've implemented these concepts in your own tutor trainings? And also, how can some of these ideas be implemented in remote and hybrid and distance trainings? All of the ways that we've been training tutors over the last 18 months, and in many cases are still continuing to.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dr. Sanford. We do have a question here that says, do you have any advice for approaching tutors that are resistant to completing projects outside of their regular tutoring duties?
Yes, I think we've all experienced this. You're not alone. Let's see. I feel more interested, not so much in making sure that every student is doing it, because that can feel like pulling teeth. If you're really concerned with making sure, okay, I have 10 tutors, I need 10 projects at the end of this. I don't feel super interested in investing my time that way. I'd rather make sure that I'm creating a dynamic where tutors feel invited into doing that, and pretty reliably I find that if I'm thinking about it that way, I'll get 6 or 7 or 8 great projects out of it, and I'm creating a culture where students feel like they can contribute to the center. So that's one way I would encourage you to think of it is, don't worry about making sure everyone who should be doing one does one, and worry more about making sure that you're getting a lot of good ones and are creating a group dynamic where that happens. I absolutely make sure, and I know this can be expensive, but you're probably doing this, but I mentioned this just so everyone hears this. It's really important to make sure that that's paid work. If it's a part of what tutors are doing, they should be getting, either academic credit or time. So I have found one of the most important ways to make sure that tutors are staying engaged with projects is to say, okay, you're on the clock. I'm carving out this hour where you are not getting appointments so that you can work on that project. Or here's a scheduled training. And in this training, this is basically functioning as a drop-in lab. Modeling a pedagogy too, right? Where you're working on your projects, and then maybe me and maybe a couple of really experienced tutors are wandering through that space, supporting you as learners while you're there. And I guess the third thing I'll mention is just making sure to celebrate those things, because I think if tutors can see, okay, these projects are visible, they're part of the identity of the center, they will feel more inspired to do them. So if they're creating like decorations for the center, things people could see, if they're being thanked publicly by you or others for doing that work, and if they're seeing, when they come back the next year as a tutor, like the survey tool I designed last year, oh, it's actually being used in some form. I think all of those things create conditions where tutors want to engage in those projects because it feels like they're really contributing to the center.
Definitely. One more question I see here is any suggestions on prioritizing must-haves in tutor training? Let's see, kind of lost that there. Must-haves in tutor training when you are running a center in a community college where turnover is constant.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I imagine that you're talking about two kinds of tutor turnover, just the churn we all experience. But I know in community colleges you have some really unique challenges of students are there for many 2-year degrees, and by the time they're qualified to be a tutor, they're also very close to the end of their time with the center. Yeah, I do have a couple of suggestions. I think, the basics of tutoring pedagogy are the most important things for students to get. Active learning, collaborative learning, how learning works, and working across diversity. I think those are the things that are quite essential, that absolutely every tutor, in some form, it's really great for tutors to have that in some way. And I also think that just about everything beyond that is elective, even learning strategies, which I think is a really important topic. Those are the ones that I would really prioritize. Yeah.
Great. We had one more I saw here on the topic. Do you have any ideas for integrating a new subset of content-specific tutors into a center that already has a large peer tutor cohort? The two groups are tutoring vastly different things, writing and public speaking versus career and professional skills, so the affinity between them isn't immediately apparent.
Great. Well, congratulations. Sounds like your center is growing. That's fantastic and a real testament to your center being recognized on campus. So that's a great situation to be in. I know that comes with challenges too. So this is always hard, right? Because this is a merger, right? So in any work situation, that's a really challenging thing to take these two different groups that have different senses of professional identity and expertise and bring them together in a way that you would like very much to form a new identity so that people don't feel like two different groups anymore. They feel like one group with a common cause. And you want to do that in a way that honors the expertise and experience of both groups, right? Especially for your group of incomers, right? You don't want them to feel like they're starting over as learners, because you want them to feel like they're bringing along everything they've learned. And you also want to honor the folks who've been in your center, who are returning as experts. I think one way to do this is to allow both things to sort of remain as like loci of expertise. Like, okay, on this team, so we're gonna have a big training. We're gonna talk about anti-racism. We're gonna talk about cognitive load theory, whatever it is, like a big concept that you're putting in front of people. Let people break out into those different teams to explore those ideas for the work that they do, but then also give them a place that they can come back together and in the large group share out that expertise. I think that's where you can start building that sense of shared identity. And I think also a thing to really try to focus on in those trainings, and this is a challenging situation, and I don't mean to say this like something that's easy to do, but to try to help tutors to see the way that the things that they do in their group are relevant to the other group as well, and to share those with each other. So, for example, if you're training together tutors who do individual consultations with a bunch of SI leaders, they're doing really different things, but it's really helpful for individual tutors to know some ways that when they see opportunities to get students working in groups, some ways that the SI leaders can help them with that, or for the SI leaders to see, okay, there are moments where I'm intervening with students individually. What are some of the pedagogies and tools that these individual tutors are really comfortable with that are relevant to what I do? So helping tutors to see those moments where they can see each other as colleagues. And I think a lot of the place you could do that is in redirecting questions. So, in these big trainings where people are together, when you get a question from one group, refer that to the other group. So, okay, those of you who are working with career writing, what are some of the insights you have from the way that you've worked with students? So trying to mutually validate that expertise is, I think, the way I would try to steer that. I hope that.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Excuse me. So thank you so much for joining us for Engineerica Education Keynote Series. We are really appreciative to you, Daniel Sanford, for your presentation. And please watch your inbox for announcements regarding the posting of the recording of today's session and our upcoming sessions. Also, please take a moment to fill out the survey that will launch when you close this session. Your feedback is key to helping us plan our future sessions and making those helpful to you and your staff. Also, visit engineerica.com to learn more about our services and solutions. We want to help you so you can so that you can focus on helping your students. A huge thank you to you, Dr. Sanford, and to the team members at Engineerica Systems for putting this together. And we want to wish you all a wonderful afternoon.